Where's my cup of tea? By the time you're watching this video, we will be at 5,000 subscribers on this channel, which is absolutely mental. I honestly really can't believe it, but I'm so grateful for you all because I have felt less alone and more connected this year during a global pandemic than I have for a good few years now. And that is entirely because of YouTube. And so thank you very much for that. I'm really grateful. So, to celebrate the fact that we are now at 5,000 subscribers, I thought we should do something a little bit silly because as much as I like to pretend I'm a glamorous pin-up type, I'm actually a bit of an idiot and I like sending myself up and I like having a laugh. So today, to celebrate, we are going to look at one of my very first high school sewing projects, which is what's on the mannequin behind me here. Just caught sight of the orange poly satin, oh god. And this I made for my GCSE textiles coursework. So I made it in my last year of high school. I was 16, well 15, turning 16, and it's supposed to be a costume for the ensemble of West Side Story. Because it was for a qualification, you couldn't just make whatever you wanted, it had to fit a brief. And so there was a brief that was something along the lines of a fancy dress costume, and I asked my teacher if I could adapt that to make it a theatre costume. I was not into costuming at all at this time. I thought I wanted to be an engineer, but I was also a theatre kid, and I think I just happened to have seen a production of West Side Story that really, inspired me and impressed me, and so I thought I'd make a costume. Who would have thought that 10 years later I would be a professional costume maker? Not 16-year-old Claude, I tell you. For context, the qualification I was taking was in design technology, so it wasn't so much about the artistic design side of things, it was more about construction and technique. Which I like to think is part of the reason why the design is so bad, but I'm not a natural designer at all. Can you tell? I like being told what to do and making it. So this was supposed to be for an ensemble member in West Side Story. Obviously, I didn't really know a lot about vintage at the time. I was obviously going on some sort of polka dot stereotypes from fancy dress and pin-up costumes I'd seen. I do remember writing about Dior's new look though and the influence of that, but seeing as West Side Story is 1957 and the new look was 47, I was a bit behind the times. The worst thing about this is definitely the fabric choice. This is a polycotton and this is a polyester satin. And as hideous as it is, in my defense, I live in the middle of the countryside. This was 2009 when I was buying these fabrics. Home sewing was just totally out of fashion. There wasn't a fabric shop where I live for 20 miles. I had to travel 20 miles. When I got there, it was a fabric land. So that is why we've got such hideous, cheap-looking fabrics. Online fabric shopping wasn't really a thing then. Definitely buying patterns, you had to go into a shop and look through the catalogue and then they had to order it in for you and you had to go back and pick it up. When I think about it now, the sewing world has changed so much for the better since I took my GCSEs. So I think I can forgive myself a little bit on a few of the questionable choices. Now, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to change my camera setup and I'm going to put this on the table. And you know, like Abby Cox does those videos where she studies the historical costumes with the camera and gives all you nice tasty close-ups of the stitching? Yeah, we're going to do that, but with my GCSE textiles coursework. And you can see how far I've come in 11 years? Yeah, 11 years. All right, let's go. Okay, so the quality's changed because you're on my phone over there and I've got my new camera in my hand here ready to go. I'm not gonna lie, my first impressions of this is that, do you know, it's not actually that bad. Okay, the stitching's quite neat, it's quite well made. You know, I obviously knew a little bit about what I was doing. So first of all, this opening here, if you look at the way I've stitched this Velcro on, it's quite neat and even. I'm impressed. So I obviously thought about the fact, and I think I actually remember writing this in my coursework, about the reason I chose Velcro was because it was to aid with quick changes. Brilliant, perfectly valid, thinking about the use of the garment, lovely. However, when I look at this now as somebody who has worked in the theatre,
I would not use Velcro like this. If I were to use Velcro at all, first of all, I would use several small sections, because inevitably what happens is when you try and Velcro up a strip like this in a hurry, you end up with something looking like that, or it's completely off balance and all things like that. Also, the continued tugging and ripping on Velcro, it makes the Velcro perforate. So it just eventually pulls out of the stitching and you've got these horrid frayed edges. So if I were going to use Velcro now, I would not use a straight stitch, I would zigzag it on, and that sort of helps prevent perforation and fraying. So if you're making a costume and you want to use Velcro for a quick change, first of all, zigzag it on. Second of all, do several smaller pieces as opposed to one long strip, and it will prevent a lot of difficulties for you. That being said, I wouldn't use Velcro. If it were up to me, I wouldn't use Velcro. I would use poppers instead, or snaps, as they call them in the rest of the world. You know, the fastening, it's all right. I mean, the covered buttons are not very well covered. You can see they're not particularly round, but I imagine that's probably to do with the horrid nature of this satin. In fact, can you see that? It's fraying badly through the little hole there. So, you know, fair enough, working with what you had. So this as well, I'm quite impressed with this facing. I mean, it's that horrid papery interfacing, which does not launder well, so that's a poor choice for a theatrical costume, but again, that was probably a budget thing or an availability thing. That's probably all they had at Fabricland. But it's quite neatly set in. You know, like look at this at the bottom here, that's quite nice. You know, that edge I've turned under there and finished and edge stitched it. You know, the stitching's pretty neat and even. So yeah, not too bad. The thing that is striking me is the pressing is not good. That's not really well pressed on the edge there. The roll here is pressed in, but not very well. You can see it's only kind of, you know, really like a turn back like that. I would want to be much crisper. And I can see straight away things like the hem are not well pressed. So I imagine that will be a running theme. And I can actually see, on talking of pressing, the darts. Let's talk about the darts, because this one here isn't too bad. I haven't pressed it exactly, and it looks like I've just stopped a little bit short with the stitching. But you know, it's all right, it's acceptable. They could do with a better press. Probably a better press would sort some of that puckering out. Oh, look, yeah, you can see what I mean there. But, you know, it's not too bad, acceptable. This side is much worse. It looks like this one is shorter than this one, so I imagine what's happened here is I haven't stitched all the way to the apex of the dart, and as a result, yeah, look, you can see in there, look at that. We've got this horrid pucker here that I've pressed in, so I obviously attempted to press it. But yeah, that is not sitting nicely. And the same with the bust dart, haven't stitched all the way to the end. Interesting that I did it right, sort of, on one and not the other. I don't know whether that was just time or laziness, or maybe that I did that one first and then that one, and that's why this one's better. I don't know. Let's look at the inside. Yeah, look at that. You can see I have not run off the edge of the fabric there, and that is what is causing all those issues. Looks like I haven't reversed either, but I have reversed on this one, which is probably adding to some of the bulky puckering issues there, because if you watch my videos, you know that these days I like to not reverse at the points of my darts and tie the threads off instead for a crisper finish. So good effort, needs improvement. So what else have we got inside? Let's have a look. Well, I mean, we'll talk about this hem in a minute. But something I did notice is rookie error. Can you see here? The seam goes one way, is pressed to the back at the armhole, but to the front at the hem. Don't know why I didn't unpick that and redo the hem. Maybe it was a time thing. Maybe I just didn't notice. I actually really like this seam finish with the stitching the seam and then pressing the seam allowance to one side and overlocking them together. Yes, it's an industrial seam finish. I imagine we did industrial seam finishes because this was a DT class, a design and technology class. But it, you know, it's perfectly acceptable. It looks very neat and tidy, so I might do it more often, to be honest. And again, on the armholes, I think this looks really tidy, overlocking it like that. There's never really a good way to finish the seam allowances of armholes. I mean, you can do a bias bound armhole, but then that adds bulk, and sometimes you have to clip the curve, and then that starts to fray. So binding it isn't great for that. And, you know, there's not really a great solution to it. But I actually think that this is pretty acceptable. Oh, look, there's some tension issues on the sewing machine there. School sewing machine, you know, been hammered quite badly in its time. So yeah, interesting. The facing here is slip stitched to the shoulder seam. That must have been a suggestion in the pattern, I guess. There's something funny happening with the collar, and I'm not entirely sure what. It looks like, yeah, it looks like it was sandwiched in with the facing, and then this bit, it looks like I've slip stitched it. Yeah, looks like I've slip stitched it. You can't really see the stitching, so I must have done it pretty invisibly, which is nice. I do remember that I altered the pattern for the collar to be rounded like this. Looks like I just, it was triangular and I just chopped a bit off, which is acceptable, I suppose. Not sure why I wanted a rounded collar though. There was probably some justification, but I didn't keep the written component of this because it was an A3 portfolio, so we'll never know, and I can't remember. Okay, let's look at the sleeves. I do remember doing a slash and spread, you know, the very sort of bog standard pattern alteration where you cut up and spread them out and redraw around it. And I think I did that partly because I knew it would get me more marks, but also I had this misguided idea about wanting it to be a 1940s style blouse as opposed to a 50s style blouse because I'd read about Dior. I don't know, anyway. So, you know, it's not brilliantly sewn in. You can see here that, you know, I obviously didn't mark on the sewing line or anything, and it's sort of, you know, wants to sit further up than it is, but gathered down pretty neatly. The cuff band, I remember I had to make my own pattern piece. It's not well gathered into the cuff at all. And as you can see, look at that poor pressing, lining around to the wrong side. Ugh. Yeah, again, poor pressing, lets it down. I think that's, you know, biggest takeaway from this is the difference that good pressing makes to a garment. Yeah, I don't think there's any interfacing in there. No. Oh, maybe there is. Nope, I don't think there is. I think it's just seam allowance. So obviously didn't grade it very well. Looks like I didn't grade the seam allowance there. Fair enough. In the theatre, we very rarely grade seam allowances because it makes things more alterable. But now, personally, when I make my clothes, like, I just hate the feel of the bulk when I wear them. So I'm like, grade all that seam allowance out, but it does mean they're more difficult to alter in the future. So let's talk about this hem. First of all, it's really badly pressed. I mean, look at that there. Oh God, Jesus. And I obviously didn't really know anything about easing in. I think that's part of the issue. You know, if I had understood that I needed to ease it, it looks like I started at this end and the feed dog has rubbed it this way. Yeah, because look, that seems matching up nicely and that seems matching up nicely, and then we get over here and it's like, no way. It's also slightly curved, so, you know, that's tricky, I suppose. Well, trickier than a straight hem. Yeah, that's a little embarrassing. I think that really lets it down. But you know what? All in all, I'm quite impressed. I thought it would be worse than this. I imagine, though, I was pretty proud of this to have kept it. If I thought it was really rubbish, I would have thrown it out a long time ago. I think I did all right. Good job. Good job, 16-year-old Claude. However, this is definitely the best of the three things that I made. So let's move on to the skirt. And we haven't even talked about the hideous petticoat I made either. So I'll be back. Hang on. Oh boy, look at that hideous fabric. Oh my God. Like I say, in my defense, my options were probably pretty limited. My budget was probably pretty limited. So I'm kind of going to forgive myself for that, but thank God my choice of fabrics got better, is all I can say. I actually think probably the choice of fabric is the worst thing about this. I mean, the hem's pretty bad now I look at it. I mean, it obviously hasn't been pressed though, so it might improve with a good pressing. Also, this seam looks like it hasn't been pressed either. I don't know if you can tell. Yeah, you can sort of see that is not very crisp at all. It's a circle skirt. It's a bog standard circle skirt. It is made in two sections. I seem to remember that was because it didn't fit on the width of fabric. Interestingly, I've done a different seam finish here. I've overlocked the pieces before I stitched them up. I imagine that's because this fabric frayed like a bitch. This is more what I would do now, particularly for the theatre, because then you can let that out more easily should this need to go on a bigger person. Not that you'd be letting out the hem of a circle skirt. So yes, the hem is ropey, just overlocked and turned up. Fair enough. However, thinking about that, if this is a twirly circle skirt meant for a dancer in an ensemble, you're going to see that overlocking when they spin around. So that's not what I would do now. I'd probably do bias binding because that would look neater. Perfectly valid as a hem, but maybe not the best choice for this style of skirt and its intended purpose. So let's have a look at the waistband. It looks like it's a straight waistband. Fine, that works. To be honest though, if I were to make a skirt like this now, I would prefer to have a slightly curved waistband. Looks like I didn't do a stitch in the ditch. Oh, I did a slip stitch. Let's have a look. Yeah, looks like I did a slip stitch with a single thread. Brilliant. So that is going to rip out. If ever I do any hand sewing on anything that's going to get any kind of wear that I need, that it's not vital is invisible, I will use a double thread just because it's stronger and it's going to launder better. You know, if one thread snaps, the whole thing's going to come undone. Whereas if you've got a double thread, if one of them snaps or wears out, at least you've got a little bit more extra support there. Let's have a look at this fastening. I do remember I had terrible difficulty with this zip. It's a lapped zip and I'd never done one like that before. And I do remember absolutely tearing my hair out and the teacher having to help me. And I think actually I came back and she'd redone it for me because I'd made such a mess of it. And you can see, you can see the scarring from where it's been unpicked and where the horrid satin's pulled. But, that's the thing when you're 16 and you're learning. Look at the pulls in the waistband there as well. It's also weirdly too low down. Don't know why I started the zip there. I think I just didn't know any better. But obviously, I put the top of the cut edge of the zip there as opposed to the top of where the teeth start. So I've got this little opening here. Another Velcro fastening, lovely, but you can see my point about Velcro. One of the reasons I wouldn't use Velcro these days is because of this hard side. You can see it's just destroying the waistband where it's catching on the threads, particularly of this satin. It's gone all fuzzy and yeah. But again, should have zigzagged it on. Did think to put it on before I made up the waistband though, so I didn't zigzag through, so I didn't stitch through both layers of the waistband so it was invisible on the inside, so points there. I'm also impressed that I didn't underlap instead of an overlap. Can't believe I thought about that. It must have been in the sewing pattern because I do remember I used a sewing pattern to make this skirt. Again, poor pressing, haven't turned that corner out properly. Look at that unpressed seam. Why didn't I press that seam? Oh my god. Anyway, so this I think is definitely of a lower standard than the blouse. I think the blouse is better than this. I don't think I made this first. I think I made the blouse first. So maybe I made this in a hurry. I was meeting a deadline. I can't remember. But yeah, this was more the standard I was expecting. The blouse was better than I was expecting, but this was what I was expecting to be a bit cringe. Speaking of a bit cringe, let's have a look at this net petticoat I made. Okay, now this is hilariously bad. This is really embarrassing to look at now. First of all, what is with this net? Why did I choose the droopiest net in the world to make a net petticoat out of? I don't know, maybe it was all I had. But this is literally just a tube of lining fabric with this, oh, look, a French seam. Oh, bloody hell. Oh, quite well done, French seam. Not brilliantly pressed. Again, the importance of pressing. But yeah, elasticated waist channel. So I imagine I probably did a French seam here because that was another technique. So you got, the more techniques you use, the more marks you got. Although why on earth I snipped it there, I have no idea. Did I do the classic thing of, yeah, look what I've done. It goes this way at the bottom where I've attached it to the net, and it goes that way at the top. So I had to snip it so that it laid flat. Ah, yeah, I mean, the gathers, what I suppose I should talk about here is how bad these gathers are. Look, I obviously did it with a running stitch, which I've left in. Look, and it's huge. That's not how you should gather by hand. I obviously tried to gather by machine and it didn't work, or maybe this was like tacking it on or something and I didn't remove it. I don't know. but it's bad. I mean, the gathers are so uneven. Look at this one. Look at that. It's just like a lump of net there and then nothing either side. And it's not well sewn on at all. I didn't finish this raw edge of the lining fabric. It's just, oh God, look at that. Ugh. Yeah, this is embarrassing. I seem to remember that this was kind of an afterthought. This was like, I had a week left or something before the deadline and my teacher was like, let's make a net petticoat. So I did this. Interesting. Oh, look, another different seam finish. What have I done here? Oh, I've zigzagged it. Okay, interesting choice. Bother French seaming it here. Maybe again it was because the more things you did, the more marks you got. But okay, acceptable. Looks kind of weird though through the net, in my opinion. I wish I'd done something else. I'm getting picky about the seam finish I used on the world's shittest net. Anyway, yeah, so this is definitely the worst of the bunch, I think. And it's a little bit embarrassing, and I'm putting it on the internet for everyone to see. But honestly, the reason I wanted to make this video was because I wanted to demonstrate that everybody starts at the beginning. There is no way to get better at sewing apart from one garment at a time. I did not wake up one day and was magically able to make historical costumes. It doesn't work like that. Yes, I had the benefit of a formal education, and do not underestimate the value of having somebody stood over your shoulder going, no, you're doing it wrong. But essentially, the most valuable thing that my degree gave me was time. It gave me 40 hours a week for 3 years where all I did was just practice sewing. And even at this point in my sewing journey or whatever, I'd been sewing for 3 years. Not a lot, let's say an average of an hour a week. But over 3 years, that's, what, 156 hours? You know, I was quite far into my sewing, even at this point. These weren't the first garments I'd made from a sewing pattern. I think I've still got the very first one. Maybe I'll dig that out for another video. But I think this was the second and third thing I'd ever made from a sewing pattern. But, you know, I had made countless bags and cushions and things before that, none of which I kept because they were all so bad. So if you are a beginner and you're frustrated about the fact that you see all these things on the internet that are amazing and you're not there yet, please know the only way to get there is to keep going. You know, then your next garment will be better than the last one, and then the one after that will be better than the next one, and you will get there. You know, there's no shortcuts. It's just, you just have to keep on sewing. As I was just thinking about this project, it came to me that I might actually still have the sewing pattern that I used to make this blouse, and it turns out I do. It's McCall's 2094. It's originally from 1999, so even in 2009 this was out of date. And it's Mrs. Top's long sleeve, short sleeve, sleeveless, you know, it's one of these 8 great looks in one. So not only do I still have the original pattern, but I've also got the bits that I used to do the slash and spread on the sleeves. So these are, you know, the bits that I cut up and I slashed apart, and this is my new sleeve pattern. So having discovered this, I thought, wouldn't it be interesting if I remade this project 10 years later with the benefit of a professional costume degree and 5 years professional costume making experience. However, the pattern is cut to the smallest size, which is a size 10, and I'm usually a 14 these days, so I'm not sure it's gonna fit. So I actually just tried the blouse on, and it turns out it does fit, and that's because, thank goodness for the 90s, the finished garment measurements for this size, the given measurement, the size chart measurement, is 83 centimetre bust, that is 32.5 inches, and the final garment measurements is a 94 centimetre bust, which is 37 inches. So there are 11 centimetres of ease in this pattern. So yeah, it still fits miraculously. So I think this calls for a silly little project. I've got some fabric in my stash that I think I'll use for this, but I don't know what I'll do for the skirt because I do not have anything remotely like that horrid orange polyester satin. But yeah, I think This calls for a little project, so that might have to be a separate video because I imagine this one's pretty long. So I hope you enjoyed this silly trip down memory lane for me revisiting my old high school sewing project. I'm glad to say I've come a long way in 10 years, 11 years, crikey. I will say it again because I do really genuinely mean it. It means a lot to me that there are 5,000 people who want to watch my videos. So I want to thank you all for your continued support. I always love reading your comments, so let me know how you're doing, how 2021 is treating you so far. Let me know what sewing project you're working on. Did you enter the Foundations Revealed competition? Let me know what your entry was so I can look out for it if you did. Yeah, let's have a chat in the comments. I've been standing up too long, so my legs are going dead and I'm starting to feel faint, so I better wrap this up. There will be another video at some point about the making of McCall's 2094, so if that's something you're interested in and you're new here, why not subscribe and join this little community of weirdos sewing on the internet. Thanks for watching. See you next time.